Hey, Jonathan.
Hey,
How's your day been so far?
it's been good. Let's see. I'm kind of recovering from PAX Unplugged. We just got back. So I'm staying in New York after PAX Unplugged to see some friends, since PAX was a good excuse to get to Philly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now
So,
I'm in a very
did
small
you.
New York hotel.
So, at PAX Unplugged, are you going to represent your board game quests, or are you doing Renegade Games or Fantasy Flight? Where are you going as? Or just a tender?
So I was there with Renegade to a degree. They kind of flew me out just to kind of have me present, and I did a few signings and uh, played some games, and it was just kind of a nice thing to do. But a lot of it was just me kind of hanging out and having a good time with friends and playing a lot of new games. It was great. Bargain Quest was doing really well, and Power Rangers. Uh, it was kind of funny actually. So we have the newest printing of Bargain Quest, and we weren't sure if it would arrive in time for the show. And thankfully it did, but it was kind of the last minute. It was on its own pallet, separate shipment. It was a whole thing. But yeah, it did pretty well at PAX. I think it premiered at PAX Unplugged 2 years ago, I believe.
So, was this just a new printing, fixing any copy errors, or was there some significant changes?
So the biggest change is actually that it's in a new box size. It is in a bigger
Hmm.
box. So the original Bargain Quest is in an 8x8. It's this big, and the
Hmm.
new one is more to a standardized box size that Renegade uses. Um,
Is that to fit expansions or just be easier to ship?
a few things. One, it helps fit expansions. It's actually a little trickier to ship because
Hmm.
the larger volume, but it fits expansions better, and it fits on retail shelves better. So the original game wasn't designed to go to retail; it was designed just for Kickstarter. So it had a very compact box. Also, we weren't sure if we'd ever get an expansion, so it was very densely packed.
Hmm.
Um, but once we kind of knew that, and once people were like Barnes and Noble, for example, won't carry Bargain Quest at the old box size. They still might not carry it, but it was the particular sort of thing. A lot of big box stores or even regular game retailers want a larger box size for better shelf presence, so that it looks nicer, kind of shows itself off a little more.
That's really interesting. Do you think if you were to go back, would you have printed it at the bigger box size, like with your Kickstarter size and all that?
So yeah, probably. So one of the things, the reason why it was the original box size was that it was originally only going to play 4 players, and it was going to be like a $35 game.
Okay.
And in the original Kickstarter, that's how much you got paid for it. But we had hit kind of our final stretch goal of that campaign was to add two more players. Was
Mm.
so you can play up to six, which I plays really well up to six. But one of the issues with that was that we had to uh, that happened late enough in the process. We were like, can we fit 6 players into this box? We need 2 more player boards and a bunch more tokens and all these things. And we managed to fit it all into the base game box, which was all kind of we had all done all the designs for. But going back, I probably would have wanted to make the box bigger to accommodate 6 players a little easier. Although I may not have done it in the same dimensions that Renegade wanted anyway, so they might have changed it anyway. But yeah, it sort
Okay.
of they've got other games at that box size, and it just kind of helps them as well because they can just they don't have to manufacture every game at a bespoke box size. They would be like, hey, we get all these different boxes and then put whatever label we want on them.
Do you think that you would have changed the Kickstarter? Because it sounds like you just barely hit this last Kickstarter goal to get 6 players. Would you have changed it in any way if you were to do the Kickstarter again?
I mean, it's really hard to say because that first Kickstarter was a very modest success, right? Bargain
Hmm.
Quest, not many people knew about it. We didn't we kind of played it more like it was a press comic book Kickstarter than if it was a proper board game Kickstarter. We didn't really scout out for game reviewers or anything. We just we had that very physical thing, and so yeah, I don't know. I think definitely playing the 6 player stretch goal was a good idea. Having that be a thing, honestly, it might. And I don't know whether it would have done better if we had just had it be 6 players by default.
Hmm.
If it was kind of a nice get to have at the very end to get people to push towards that last stretch goal. Yeah, I don't know. It's tough to say. Um, the biggest thing about Bargain Quest actually is that we did the box art changed over the course of the campaign, and
Oh,
I definitely credit the new box art with a huge amount of our sales. I think the box art we have now is much more appealing than the one that we had originally planned for the campaign.
hmm.
But yeah, it was, I don't know. It's tough to say just because everything is so different. Like the second Kickstarter was wild compared to the first. Ugh.
So that's pretty fun that you have your own game that you're creating and publishing and doing all this stuff, and you have the job at Fantasy Flight and doing stuff with
I
Renegade. Do
don't
you
work
feel
at
like
Fantasy Flight anymore. That's
you don't? Oh, okay.
you know, so actually, so here's sort of the thing. So I worked at Fantasy Flight for about 2.5 years, and I did Imperial Assault, I did Doom, I did Battle Lore, I did all these things, and then sort of at the tail end of that, became kind of uh, I was basically done in Minnesota,
Mhm.
and I sort of made the call. I was leaving Fantasy Flight, and I made the call. Am I going to stay in board games? And Bargain Quest was basically my last shot at board games. It was like, okay, Tim Fowers had kind of convinced me, like, hey, try the indie scene. I think you could do it. And I'm like, I don't know. All right, I'll give it a shot. And Bargain Quest was designed like right after I left FFG. I was like, okay, what game do I want to make that I could not make at FFG? Right, like what is not a Fantasy Flight game that
Mhm.
I really wanted to make. And I came up with Bargain Quest. I pitched it to my sister. We did all that. Like, if Bargain Quest did not work out, then I probably would have retired from board games and gone back into like animation or like comics or whatever.
Mhm.
But it did, and so I stayed in board games and I became independent and freelancer. I moved to New Jersey for about a year during Bargain Quest, and then I moved to San Diego with my partner. She goes to grad school out there, and and then from there I met up with like IDW and Renegade, uh, where I've been doing freelance projects with them.
So you saying you're doing freelance projects? Are they like the publisher you go to with designs and pitch?
So let's see. So yeah, Renegade is basically Scott really likes me, which has been nice, and he is very adamant that like I show him prototypes before other people. Although
Okay.
like it depends on the fit, right? Like there are certain games that Renegade may not necessarily print. Certain games that may be a better fit at other companies or companies with this or that license. I get approached by companies sometimes being like, "Hey, we have this IP and we'd like to do stuff with it. I know you do a lot of license stuff. Do you think this might be something you might want to try?" And some of them I've said yes to that I can't say, and some of them I passed on. But it's been interesting. IDW was kind of like that with Nicktoons Splat Attack.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah,
Do you feel like when you were at PAX U, did people come to your booth with Star Wars Imperial Assaults, Power Rangers? What was the thing you were getting signed the most? And
mostly Power Rangers. Power Rangers has kind of been the hot thing for that community. I think the Heroes of the Grid, like the Facebook group for the board game, has like 4,000 members or something.
wow.
It's wild. And yeah, like that fan base is super dedicated. Like I love Power Rangers fans. They're really nice. Um, I'm not gonna throw stones, but like Star Wars fans can be mean. You know, I have yet to meet a mean Power Rangers fan. And it's probably part of the IP. Like Power Rangers is Care Bears with kicking. Like it's so wholesome. It's cartoon. Um, but yeah, like it was mostly Power Rangers. I got a couple of Bargain Quest folks. It was interesting. Like Bargain Quest was selling really well, even though it wasn't even getting demoed. Because I mean, it's not new. It's like 2 years old now, but that was selling quite well. And Power Rangers was doing good. But it's a tricky convention game just because it's like a gigantic box, and so like who wants to carry that home?
Yeah,
Um,
that's true.
yeah. Although people, Gloomhaven does fine for itself. So who am I to talk? Uh, I think yeah, it was mostly Power Rangers. I did see like there were a couple of like folks who like were like playing Imperial Assault or like I saw a guy with like an Imperial Assault shirt and I was like, hey, nice shirt, and they kind of like waved me out. Like he did not look at me, so like I don't know. Man, yeah, it's been neat.
Do
I'm still
you
I'm still in touch with my Fantasy Flight, my old FFG family, and it's nice to see them at shows. It's going by.
yeah. It's great to have this group of different places you've worked a bunch. Do you have a process that's like different when you're creating a game for an IP versus when you're creating Bargain Quest or your own different games? Like, how's the process different?
Yeah, I mean, people always, the constant question is like, theme first or mechanics first, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because I work on a lot of licensed games, it's theme first a lot of the time. It's like, we have this IP, we have this license, make a game for it. Okay, what kind of game would work for that IP? Bargain Quest is one of the first games where I started with a mechanic, which was the idea of like this display of like, okay, you want to lure heroes into your shop, so if you put your best item on display, it'll get them into your shop, but you can't sell it. So do you want to be able to sell your best item, or do you want to be able to show it off and guarantee the hero you want? That kind of push-pull is the core of Bargain Quest and is where, kind of the whole game got its start. And it grew out of that, whereas other games tend to be, you have this IP, what's a good fit? Like, it's Power Rangers. Okay, it's got to be co-op, right? It's got to be, you got to be working together. You got to have, everyone wants to be a ranger. How do the colors come in? How do the colors matter? How do, like, we want to have Zords in the game because Zords are really important, and like you need a variety of monsters in each game. And so all of those sort of setting limitations inform what kind of game you're making. Like Doom, ideally, is a fast-paced shooter, very violent, very aggressive, where Star Wars could be a little more tactical, a little more adventure game, and less aggressive for the players. And yeah, I personally really like having those tent poles of being like, okay, I've got two mechanics, right? Both of them can work, but which one suits but like if I can't decide, I go, which one suits the IP better, right? Which one feels more like Doom or Star Wars or Power Rangers? And I really like doing that. I love working on RPG stuff. I'm realizing I might sound a little bit sick because I think post-con, I believe they refer to it as con crud, con plague. Yeah, so I think I may have caught a bit of something. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see.
I do
Have
the
you?
fist all the time, but like, when people offer the handshake, I'm like, all right, well, there it is.
Yeah, you gotta have the sanitizer right next to you.
Yeah. I lost mine halfway through the show, which I think has led to my current state of like sniffles.
So, what's your career looking like in the next 5 years? You said that you wanted to get into board games, or like that Bargain Quest was your last chance at board games, and it was successful. Is it going to be the rest of your life, or do you want to continue to like push and see, is this something just for the near term?
I mean, I'm really enjoying doing board games. I don't see myself stopping anytime soon. Certainly, there are other things that I like. Like I've got, like most nerds, I'm working on a fantasy novel, but who knows if that'll go anywhere. But it's a nice hobby. I do drawing and illustration a bit. But yeah, board games seems to be the way and the thing. I'm having fun, and people seem to like my games. So certainly, for the near term future, that is where I am, and it's nice. I've got a lot of ideas. Honestly, my worry right now is I have a lot of my work is expansion projects, because like Power Rangers is doing well enough that they're like, okay, we need the next expansion. What's coming next? What's coming next? Which monster should we do? And so I've got a lot of Power Ranger stuff coming down the pipe. I've got a Bargain Quest expansion I've been cooking as well. And both of those are eating up so much of my time. I'm not having a lot of time to do my new stuff. Like I've got several ideas for new games and new prototypes that I just haven't really had time to give the attention I would ordinarily, because I have to maintain these other two game lines. And I'm wondering when when I'm going to have to confront that and be like, okay, I need to either step away from Power Rangers or pass the reins on to someone else or something. But I mean, for now, I'm just doing my best, and we'll see how it shakes out.
How much time does it take you to, like, if you were to give your full time to a new game, like, what time commitment would that be? Is it like a week of just straight development? Is it months of thinking over things?
It varies a lot. Like some games pop out like real easy. Like the core concept and the core bits are really easy. Usually it takes multiple months, right? Like particularly because I do such like thematic games, there tend to be a lot of exceptions in those rules to make things feel engaging. And so there's a lot of content in the games that I develop. So it's like I have to test like each of the heroes, each of the villains, each of the monsters, each of the interactions, and more heroes than is reasonable for me to test against each combination. Right? Like it's entirely possible that like this hero and this monster combination is a little like is unbalanced in this or that way. and just so long as like I can make sure that I can maintain the rule structure and like my core philosophies of like, okay, no hero should do more than this much damage. No monster should be able to do more than like whatever. So long as I can maintain those, then it should be fine. But it's hard. It's like, I mean, I got to talk to Mark Rosewater once recently, and it was an eye-opening conversation about like designing. He designed Magic. He's the lead designer for Magic the Gathering,
Right.
and he's got his work cut out for him, right? Like every time he makes a new card, it interacts with every other card in the entire play space, and like with no restrictions, right? Like it's like, oh, like color pie, all these things have to be taken into account, and so they maintain these really strong philosophies of like, what can the color pie do? What can't it do? How much is mana worth? Like all these things, like what's the curve? Those have to be hard set if you're making a game with so much variety that can expand out, hopefully infinitely. I mean, we've got 25 seasons of Power Rangers to cover, so like, good lord.
Have you had any like core mechanics that have been challenging, or like pet mechanics that you try to fit in but just don't seem to work?
Okay, let's see. There's a few. I think currently there's an interesting balance between making monsters kind of feel different. I don't know if you can hear there's some like slamming going on behind me.
It's all right.
Currently there's been an interesting challenge because I've given Rangers a huge amount of different mechanisms to fiddle with. So it's like, this one plays with energy, this one plays with their card size, whatever. Whereas the monsters have a lot fewer levers to mess with. And so it's becoming a little bit trickier and trickier to make monsters feel unique and feel appropriate to their character. And it's also tricky just because Power Rangers has been going on for so long. Several iconic monsters have the same gimmick. And so having to make that gimmick feel different for the different monsters just by basically being the same creature. And like the show had a very limited budget for many, many years. So it's like a lot of monsters have basically the same laser eyes, or like a mist that makes explosions. Like that's like, like 19 monsters have like spit a mist that explodes. And it's like you have to like, and so making that either feel different or like whatever it has been an interesting experiment of like choosing who gets that move and how to make those moves work differently. Has been a bit of a challenge and been a bit interesting. The other thing that Renegade somewhat regrets, which is something I really like, is there's a mechanic where when you're deploying foot soldiers, foot soldier cards are each associated with a location. So it's like, okay, putty patrollers come from Angel Grove because they're part of the original Mighty Morphin setting. That's where putty patrollers show up. And so we have them tied together in this fun way. So it's like, if you're fighting on Angel Grove, you're fighting putties. If you're fighting like in space, you'd be up against Quantrons, whatever. But because of that, every foot soldier type has to be associated with a location tile, which means we can't just print a box of a bunch of foot soldier minis. They have to contain like a game board with them that is a very particular, like big curved size, which means that it's very like, we can't just do like a little pack of foot soldiers. We have to do these bigger boxes for them. So expanding that has been a logistical challenge, which I was not anticipating.
I'm sure you could charge more for it, which, I mean, could be good, could be bad.
We'll figure things out, I'm sure. Like, people want all the different foot soldiers, the different factions. Like, Ranger fans are wild because, like, everyone kind of came into it at a different age. And so you get, like, everyone kind of, when they were 12, whatever Power Ranger show was on is the one that they love. And then they, like, maybe they followed it, maybe they didn't, but that's going to be their favorite. And so we get fans who are like, oh, when are you doing Dino Thunder? When are you doing Jungle Fury? When are you doing Dino Charge? When are you doing SPD? And like, there's too many for us to like do all of them. But everyone is like, you gotta do this one or that one. And so we're doing our best to try and figure out ways to please all of the different fans. We're doing like packs that feature multiple different different members of multiple teams teaming up as like a special pack. Stuff like that has been hopefully a good thing.
Yeah. Do you find yourself creating these expansions for people assuming that they've bought all 6 other expansions, or do you just make this one fun even though maybe some of the mechanics are the same from like your second expansion, even though this is the 8th one? Do you feel like weird doing something like that?
I kind of there's a philosophy that Fantasy Flight instilled in me, and the core idea of it is that only ever assume that the person who's buying your game has the base game when you're making an expansion, right? Like, you cannot assume they have bought an expansion, because nothing feels worse than when you go to it, like when you're in a store, you're like a new board gamer, you buy the game and then you buy one expansion because it looks cool, and you find out that expansion is like, oh yeah, you can't play this without the other one. And even if the box, it says it on the box, it's just such a bigger ask to be like, hey, I know you thinking about this expansion, but the only way you're allowed to play this is if you have this other one. Like, FFG did it once when they did like that one Arkham Horror expansion that expands every other Arkham Horror expansion, and that was its own like gimmick basically. It's like, look, here's more content for all like 18 of the Arkham Horror expansions we did. That's fine. But generally, like, we just can't assume that they have this or that. So yeah, like, I'm trying to be very careful. Like, if we use a rule again, we'll reintroduce it. We'll be like, hey, this character attaches cards to enemies, and here's how that works. And it was introduced in Shattered Grid, but it is now, we're reusing it, and here's how, and like, just here's a reminder of how it works if you don't have the other box. One thing we are doing though is monthly scenarios, where every month Renegade is putting out a PDF with like a special kind of narrative scenario with its own setup and a couple of rules tweaks.
Cool.
Yeah, like Pandemic was going to do that. Pandemic has posted like 2 of them in the last like 5 years, but I remember I really like the 2 of them. They're really good. So I was like, I was talking to Renegade. I said, can we do that? Like that, I think it would be a good fit for Power Rangers. And so we've been doing that. I think we're on our 4th or 5th one now. And we've been managing to maintain that monthly cycle, although approvals can get tricky because you have to submit them to Hasbro. But so we're doing these scenarios, and those scenarios I'm allowing myself to be like, okay, you need this expansion to play this scenario. Like, this expansion features this villain, so if you don't have that villain, you can't play the scenario. And that's it's a free expansion. It's a free scenario, so I think that I'm more comfortable with. Although several of those, I am also making sure not to go like 8 too many in a row without being like, hey, and here's the scenario for the base game. I think like November scenario was a base game one. December is going to be Christmas, and so that's going to be that I want to be a base game one, because like if people get the game for Christmas, they're probably just getting the base game, and so like here's a fun scenario for that. Yeah, that's having a good time.
So, in my own experience, I've designed a few games and launched them on Kickstarter last year, and I imagine that I'm doing this all independently, and you've done a few, like you've done Bargain Quest, you've done the independent thing, but what's it like working on a team, and what's like your role in it versus just doing everything yourself?
So I have found that I like working on a team a little better than working independently, mostly because I hate answering customer service emails. Like, it's just such a, like, and having, like, I like talking to fans. I love like responding to the community, but sometimes it's just like the amount of time you have to spend investing in like making sure you're answering all the comments, making sure you're like on top of all these things, all these logistics, all your spreadsheets are right, all your, all the shipping timelines all line up. Like, all of that was such a headache for Bargain Quest, and it's like, and I'm not good at it is the other thing. Like, I'm not good at staying on top of that stuff. So it's really helpful for me to know that there are people who are good at it, for whom this is their real job, focusing on that and delivering the better experience. And part of that is that I was used to it, right? Because at Fantasy Flight, you basically have no idea what's going on with the other departments. You have the design silo. We're designing stuff, and we get like maybe we talk to the artists a little bit, and we talk to the marketing a little bit to like let them know, hey, here's what the game's about, so you can talk about it. But like from there, like once Imperial Assault was out the door, I didn't even have to think about it for like 5 months while it was like produced and like manufactured and all. Like, they worked out all the minis and all the whatever. I mean, I talked to the sculptors a bit, so that was fine. But like when all of that, once it was released and all the marketing was happening, we were already working on something else. We're like, oh, hey, it's out. That's cool. It was a completely different experience to like Bargain Quest, where I am there for every step of the process, which is cool and neat, and gave me a real appreciation for the work that these other people are really good at and can do. Renegade is more like Bargain Quest. Working with Renegade has been more of I'm not super plugged into the production or development stuff, although they have been very comfortable with letting me in on it. Like they will tag me and like, hey, here's the sample from the factory. Does anything look wrong to you guys? You know, Jonathan, take a look. Does anything seem good or bad? Whereas some companies like IDW is very much like, hey, here's the design doc, here's all the information, go. And then I don't hear about it until it's been printed, right? Like unless they have a pressing question, it's like they'll figure everything out on their end. Yeah.
So with your games, are you the primary number one designer, or are you like working with other designers and you have to like compromise on decisions? And
recently, I've been the primary designer. I worked collaboratively on like Forbidden Stars and for Imperial Assault. Those were collaborative, and I really liked that. And honestly, I kind of miss that. But lately, it's been mostly just like completely independent design where I'm just sitting in a room smashing my head against a board game, like, oh, God, trying to make it work. And like it helps though that I do have like a design community where if I have trouble, I can just be like, hey, Nikki Valens, or hey, Brad Andres, like designers and friends that I know from like either FFG or other work, and be like, hey, what are your thoughts on this thing? Or like, how do you feel about this kind of line of sight? And they can, I can get some input with them. I share an office right now with Dan Blanchett, who designed Abomination. Great game, by the way. But yeah, Dan Blanchett has been very helpful, like helping me do some playtesting, and we've been helping each other out. So that's been great.
So when I was designing games, one of the ways that I found that like I would get through a wall of like no new ideas and things aren't working was just stopping that one and working on a different design. Do you have something like that? I mean, it sounds like you talk to other designers. What other ways do you get through like a motivation or design wall?
Definitely, that's a good way to do it. Is like kind of transitioning into other things. Do you ever have the experience where you're working on a design and you have a really great idea, and then you're like, oh, but wait, that might fit better in this other game that I'm working on. Okay, I'm gonna move it there and come up with a new idea.
Yeah, you know what I experienced was that this like one concept didn't work in the game that I was working on in the moment, so I just ripped it out and put an entirely new game all centered around it. And I actually enjoyed that game a lot more and just poured all my time into it. And then when I came back to the original game, I had all these new flood of ideas and new ways I had been testing things. It was like an amazing experience to see how just having different projects can unlock a lot of creativity.
That's great. I think, yeah, game design is kind of a puzzle in a neat way. And like there's definitely an adrenaline rush of like when you get an epiphany, you're like, oh, got it. I figured it out. I do tell a lot of, when I talk to new designers though, I do have kind of this thing that I often say where it's like game design is often very fun, but it doesn't need to be. And that what is fun to design is not always fun to play. Because I see a lot of I see a lot of new designers get really invested in like their super perfect, elegant system where everything hangs together beautifully and everything is so excellently balanced, and it's just not exciting or not fun. Like everything is just kind of there, and that works, that fits together. Like I ended up getting this because like a friend of mine gave possibly the most devastating diss to one of my prototypes, which was just like. We were playing like he was like, this seems like it was really fun to design.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, like he was like, yeah, this is, and yeah, it was like I had a lot of fun building a system, but I realized that had taken away from it, like the excitement of the players when the system was too perfectly balanced. Every choice was good. Every choice was fine. And all the bits kind of worked together. And at the end of the game, everyone kind of had a similar point spread, and someone may have had more or less, but it wasn't exciting. It wasn't engaging. It didn't feel. It was missing some stuff because it was too elegant. It was too clean and too balanced, which is a weird thing to say. It was a weird problem to have, but is something that I've encountered and like is just very strange. Of like you created this very intricate system to eventually just lead to a 50-50 die roll or whatever, right?
Yeah. Have you ever gotten like really far down the design path and had to kill an idea because there wasn't any spark of joy?
Oh, hell yeah. I've got so many games that are like basically done. And I was like, this is not as good as Concordia. Like, you're like, I've had a lot of games that are like, oh man, like this is like, I finished the design and like, stuff. This, but it's not great. Like I'm like, this is not like as. But I can think of other games I would rather play, or like other games that kind of do what I'm trying to do better. And they just kind of, yeah, they've landed on the cutting room floor. Does it happen to you often, or like how many?
I've had it happen a few times where I get pretty far and then like either the game is like too small to be like worth playing in my mind. Like I would never pull it off the shelf, even though I like the small concept that I'm like really pushing for. It's like a 5 minute game, and I can't design a system around it that supports that one mechanic I really liked. And so I just either put it on the shelf or I like begrudgingly try and shove it into another game, but that usually just turns into this thing where I feel like it was a waste of time.
Well, I mean, like
Uh,
Button Shack does all those wallet games, right? Like, try pitching it there.
Yeah, I mean they do. So that does make sense. It could be a good fit there, and it was a fun system to build. But like, you know, what do you do? Like, do you have a question you ask to be like the ultimate test? Like, is this something to continue working on? Is this something to kill? Or is this something to change?
No, I don't really have like a specific question. A lot of it is just like where I feel like it is, like how excited am I about it? And some of it is just like, hey, I was shopping this around for like a couple weeks and no one really bid, or like it wasn't really, it didn't quite, yeah, it's just not doing it. I think one of them is when like people aren't, if a game is really far along and people kind of aren't excited to play test it, that can be kind of a sign.
Mm.
Like if it's like, hey, I want to basically like pulling this off a shelf, and players are like, we don't want to play that. Let's play a different game, or let's play a different whatever. Then I'm like, maybe I should rethink something or another, or maybe they've just gotten tired of it because like playtesting groups do get tired.
Yeah.
Uh,
So when you're saying you're shopping it around, is that like shopping around, like you're saying, to friends or playtesting groups, or is it to different publishers that might?
but yeah, like publishers, when if I like, I'll like, call up Scott, or I'll call up like, or I'll go to shows and just be like, hey, so I've got this concept. What do you think? And it's like they can often be like, that doesn't seem like a fit for us, or it's like, we kind of just published a game with that similar, with that mechanic or with that IP, and like we're still seeing how that's going to do. Or like, hey, we just published one of those and it didn't do very well, so we're not going to do another one, even if yours is good or better. Like some of those,
Mhm.
like it's like, oh, the market's not ready for it, like, or the market's this or that. Like I'm not a marketing person. But yeah, I'm just kind of, I do my best to try and make the best game that I can, and sometimes I just like get stuck, right? I'm like, okay, I've had this core idea, I've got a lot of these good ideas, but there's one thing that's missing, right? Like I've got this great grand concept, but I just don't have a really hooky core mechanism, or I don't have a really, like, I can't solve how to do enemy AI in this game.
Mm.
And then I just kind of set it aside until I can solve that puzzle at a later date. I got a couple games like that, but man, co-op games are hard, man. You ever do a co-op?
I have not done a co-op. I just don't really enjoy co-op, like playing them as much, so it's just not something that I'm like inclined to try and create.
And I've
Uh,
been doing a lot of them recently. Like that was like a bucket list item until I did Power Rangers, and now I'm just like, well, here I am.
yeah. It does feel like when it's done right, like I like Gloomhaven because I feel like I'm progressing through a story and it feels purposeful that we're doing it cooperatively. But when I'm playing Pandemic, it feels played out. And like if I go and play another game, I feel like even though there's different things that happen, it just feels like I'm playing the exact same game. And so it's just like a missing feeling that I get from just one playthrough of a cooperative game. I had a question though, like when you're thinking about like from a business standpoint, Bargain Quest, you published originally on your own, and like, is that right, or was it initially with
Yeah,
Renegade?
I published it on my own, and then I have since sold the publishing rights to Renegade, who are handling the manufacturing and publishing of it now. So
I mean, by what you've done, it sounds like you think it's more worth doing it through Renegade, but I'm sure like the margins are a lot smaller on like what you're making from it, or like,
yeah, I make way less money now than I did, or off of Bargain Quest than selling direct, sort of, because they are selling a much greater volume, and they're selling, to retailers, and they're getting. The main thing I was realizing, like, what is my time worth, right?
mm-hmm.
Because like, yes, I made more. Your margin when selling direct is like huge. Like Tim Fowers does, this is his whole business model, right? Like for like Paperback and Burgle Bros, like those games, he only has to sell like, you know 10,000 copies of a game a year, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
like that might be an exaggeration, but like he only has to sell a very small volume compared to like other publishers or like whatever who have to sell way more because they you have MSRP, 50% of MSRP when selling to retailers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Going over all the different things. Like instead of you're no longer just paying manufacturing and shipping.
Mm-hmm.
Now you're paying for all of these middlemen, and I'm now paying for all of these middlemen. But I have way more time to focus on design and doing things that I like. And so, like, even if the profit margin is lower, I think my quality of life has definitely improved. The fewer customer service emails I have to answer.
Yeah. And imagine like if you were to continue doing.
For Tim, like, he's doing great. He's having a great time, with his business model, and it's working really well for him. So, I think it really depends on what, you know, what you want out of what you're doing. Have you been
Right.
mostly indie or?
I have been only indie, and that's just because like I feel like I don't have the money or skills to go and pitch, and like it just like if I can create it and people like it, and I can launch it on Kickstarter because I have like rudimentary graphics skills and design skills and marketing skills. So I feel like obligated almost to at least try it on my own, which is a little bit of a thing that I don't like because I wish I was bad at stuff so that I could just have to go and publish it through a different publishing service or something.
Yeah, I mean, there's a factor of privilege to it all too. Like, it's really important to acknowledge, like, not everyone can afford to like go to conventions and pitch games. Like, that is not something everyone can do. Like, not everyone can afford to like hire artists for their prototype. And so,
Yeah.
like, people who have like either the advantage of pre-existing money or pre-existing skills that they were able to cultivate, like, it's super helpful. Like, I mean, for me, Bargain Quest, one of the reasons why it's so good is because of the art. And the art is not like it's my sister, and yeah, I paid her for it, but like I have that connection, you know,
Yeah.
like I yeah, she probably would not have done art for a board game for someone else, but because I happen to be lucky enough to have an immensely skilled, former Disney animator, like their Disney biz dev artist, as a sister, I could be like, hey, could I hire you to do art for my game? And she was like, yeah, sure, let's do it. And just, be like working together. But like, that is a huge unearned advantage that I had, like in the creation of Bargain Quest. So I definitely want to acknowledge that privilege exists and that can make things more or less difficult for people.
So would you give the advice to people to do independent first, or would you tell people to go pitch to publishers?
It's a circumstance thing, right? Like I think definitely I would always recommend trying to pitch to publishers, even if you are planning on doing independent. Like, even if you want to do independent, just give them the pitch, because they will give you feedback that will be helpful, right? Like, if you pitch and they're not at all interested, or they will like be like, here's why this or that doesn't work. That's strong feedback. That is just like kind of free feedback that is useful. Whereas, like, if you just go completely off the cuff indie, you may not be aware of like, oh, hey, this other game that is coming out at this time, or this other game that is doing whatever might eat your lunch, or might have, or like, hey, don't. I was lucky enough to get George Rohak, who helped us manage our Kickstarter. He was very plugged into Kickstarter. He was like, okay, here are months when you don't want to launch a Kickstarter, right? Like, that kind of stuff is also very helpful. But being able to get in touch with these people and pitch games is always, I think, a helpful factor in the process, even if you are going to go completely independent.
I think that's a good point. So what are your thoughts on just like the board gaming industry in general? Do you feel like it's moving more mainstream, or do you feel like it's the bubble that will just pop and publishers are just going to start losing money because there's too many out there?
Definitely, there's too many out there. Like, I think we are due for a contraction of the industry. Either publishers kind of fusing together, or like eating each other to like consolidate a few things. But then again, I've been saying that for like 3 years now, and it just keeps growing. So who the hell knows? I think it'll be interesting to see going forward, particularly depending on like the economics of things. Like, if we dive into a huge recession, certainly people have less money to spend on leisure time. Although, like, board games have managed to survive like various recessions fairly solidly. We'll see. I am really curious to see where things are going to go in the immediate next couple of years. there are definitely way more board games out there than any person can reasonably play or any media company can like reasonably cover. Right? There are like a lot of amazing games. They're just flying under the radar at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Because like thousands of games get printed every year, and of those, maybe a few hundred survive a few years, and of those, maybe a dozen become evergreen. And there are only so many games that can really be evergreen at a given time, right? Like, and some games are like actively gunning to eat other games' lunch, right? Like you've got It's a Wonderful World, I believe, by Lucky Duck Games, which is like basically like has been pitched as here is Seven Wonders but better.
Mm-hmm.
And if that game does do the thing and become like, yeah, no, play like don't play Seven Wonders, play this, then that'll become the thing, and then Seven Wonders will no longer be evergreen eventually, maybe. But yeah, we'll see. Like there have been a lot of deck builders like Ascension exists, and it like was going to be the Dominion killer, but I think Dominion has managed to stay in the game. So yeah, it's a whole thing. I think certainly as the audience gets bigger, which is continuing to get bigger, it will still be able to sustain more and more publishers. So for our sakes, I hope it keeps doing really well.
Right. Well, I know you got to go soon. So if people want to follow you or hear more about what you're doing, where can they do that?
Yeah, so they can find me at my website at www.jonathanying.com. They can also find me on Twitter at FancyMancer. Yeah, I basically post a lot of random stuff. I post some of my art too, so like that's not really board game related. But
Okay.
yeah, that is where you can feel free to reach out, get in contact. I think I'm also FancyMancer on Board Game Geek. So yeah.
Is there anything you want to promote, like new expansions, new games, new things coming up?
We got Power Rangers. We wrapped up our second Kickstarter. We've got the Power Rangers Zeo expansion coming out. We're doing monthly scenarios for Power Rangers, and Renegade is doing really well. And Bargain Quest is once again, it is finally back in. It's going to be back in stores now because it was sold out for so long. And this print run is already sold out.
Wow.
Yeah, like they like had ordered it and it has arrived, and it's already and sold out. By that we mean it is spoken for, like it is going to retailers who will then sell it. So like it's going to be hard to find it online, but if you go to your local retailers and they have Bargain Quest, I'd recommend snatching a copy before it's gone.
All right.
Yeah, I mean, hey, they're going to do another print run too, so you can wait on that one.
They're doing another, like, is it within a few months or is it like another year or so?
Oh, you know what? I don't know. I just know that like it is sold out quickly enough that they're going to be like, all right, let's call in the next one. Maybe bigger, maybe not. I don't know. We'll see.
So if people want it, they should go get it now.
Very cool. That would be my recommendation. But I mean, I'm biased, of course.
Right. Awesome. Well, it's been great talking with you, Jonathan, and thanks for your time.
Yeah.
Right.
Let me know if you ever want to hang out.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Great talking to you, man.
All right. I'll talk to you later.
Get you around.